Senator Sales, always a pleasure. Thanks for being with us. I want to get your thoughts on the State of the State address last night. But first, what's the other action that's been taking place in the Capitol in Helena that hasn't been getting all the attention?
Well, there's a myriad of bills that are working their way through the process. This is the fourth week of the session. I think this is day 20. So it takes a while to ramp things up. But here in the next week or two, we're going to be firing on all cylinders, and the committees are going to be extremely busy. Bills like local option sales tax have been heard. There was a bill that was brought forth by Justice Baker over in the House. It was a bill from the 17th session that was defeated that would create another entitlement for people out there, similar to the OPD, the Office of Public Defense. This is a little bit different slant. It would provide money for civil litigants that are indigent. And yesterday in that committee, that bill was defeated in executive action on a very narrow vote. So, like I said, ton of different bills being heard, tax bills, all different types. So things are starting to pick up here at the legislature.
Well, I heard a full in-depth report from Shaylee Rager with the Legislative News Service, the School of Journalism students who are covering the Capitol this session. And maybe to summarize that 3-minute report, what it sounded like to me is Governor Steve Bullock was tax and spend, and Senate President Sales said, nope. Is that a good summary?
Well, it's pretty close to accurate. The governor went through about 45, 50 minutes of explaining why we need to spend more tax dollars on a myriad of different government programs. And he celebrated the idea that people need more help from the government, that it's a good thing that there are more children that need to be fed at our schools. It's a good thing that people that used to provide for their own health care are now wards of the state. And I would argue that it's just the opposite. We need to make people more independent, and quite frankly, the best health care program anybody can have is a good job so they can pay for their own health care.
Yeah. My reaction, and I'll fully admit I did not watch the entire 45-minute speech. I was kind of like Richard in Lewistown. I forgot the thing was even coming up. But in part because, frankly, I don't expect much out of Governor Bullock. We haven't seen much out of the first 6 years. This was his last State of the State address. I don't think we can expect much here out of him in the final 2 years either. But the other interesting thing about this was that he's giving this final State of the State address really under a cloud right now. I'm sure you've read the stories out of New York City, the mayor of New York City hammering Governor Steve Bullock over the sexual harassment scandal involving former Bullock aide Kevin O'Brien. Former Montana Congressman Rick Hill, I spoke with him. He says that now that the legislature, if it has to, should subpoena any of the documents regarding all of those secret settlements that were paid out under the Bullock administration to see if there's even more to that story. Do you think that the legislature might get more involved here in demanding more of an investigation as well?
Well, actually, in the interim, we did something a little bit different. We created a select committee to look into those payments, those hush payments. And, of course, the Democrats poo-pooed it, and they discounted it. But we formed a committee in the interim. They met via conference call over the phone a couple different times. That committee is going to fire back up. There's going to be a couple different bills that are going to be referred to it. And the Senate and the House, in joint cooperation, are going to take another look at these matters. And we have the ability to subpoena documents. We'll see if the administration will be forthcoming. Unfortunately, during the interim, there was quite a bit of foot dragging that went on in terms of trying to obtain information regarding this. These are payments that are made with taxpayer money, and there should be a level of disclosure so we have an idea what's going on. I think that oftentimes people's identities should be concealed for reasons of privacy, but in terms of why we're making these payments and how much we're making these payments and in what frequency, and if there's been some sort of criminal cover-up potentially, then by all means we need to know all the information. So that committee is going to start meeting again and during the session, and it'll be interesting to see what comes out of it.
How much trouble do you think that the governor might be in right now with the New York, refusing to comment, refusing to answer questions from even the New York Times? How much trouble do you think he's in?
Well, I don't think this is good for anybody that's in public office that aspires to go to the next level, whether that be the president's office or a U.S. Senate seat. I don't know what the plans are exactly for the governor, but I don't think it's helpful to anybody that's in office to have accusations or a cloud of misconduct potentially, or especially in these sensitive areas of that's come to light over the last couple of years. So I can say it's without reservation that I'm sure it's not helpful.
I know no party is probably immune to this. Both parties at times may have a member or two who will offer up legislation that might seem a little out there, a little crazy. Some of those, for example, right now there's legislation to ban the use of plastic straws, and they'll charge a fee to any. They'll fine restaurants for giving plastic straws out without the request. How much time do you have to spend kind of batting down some of the crazy legislation that might get proposed from time to time?
Most of those type of ideas don't get a lot of attention. They get a bill hearing, people come in and testify, and then quite often executive action is taken in a fairly quick order. It's just part of the process. We all come up with ideas that different political persuasions are either, glad to hear it or they're horribly opposed. I've been guilty of that myself from time to time. So, legislation's oftentimes the beauty of it is in the eye of the beholder. So it's part of what we do up here. I think it's necessary. I think it's good to have the debate. So we do spend some time on stuff that I think that probably isn't as important, but that's part of the process. And I would defend anybody's right to bring a bill, regardless of the content or regardless of the subject matter.
Yeah, infrastructure funding vetoed by Bullock in 2013, vetoed by Bullock in 2015. He missed the attempt again. The session is what do you think is going to be done on infrastructure this time around?
Well, it's hard to say. The governor's presented a budget to us that is almost a spitting image of what we had in the 17 session, complete with the same tried and true tax increases that we defeated in 17 and defeated again in the governor's special session a year ago, November. It's like deja vu all over again. We've seen these things. I don't think they're going to get a lot of traction. You look at MSU, for example, with this Romney Hall being the top tip of the spear of what the university system needs from an infrastructure standpoint. And then I think there was an article that came out just recently that said that the university had been a recipient of something like $400 million over the last 8 years in charitable contributions.
Yeah, $413 million to be. I saw President Cruzado give an address at an ag chamber banquet, and pretty impressive, the fundraising. Hats off. But yeah, it certainly begs the question.
It's awesome that people want to give to a university that's thriving like MSU, but I think it's somewhat disingenuous to think that the taxpayers should fund this building on the campus when they've been a beneficiary of so much goodwill and so much charitable giving.
Yeah.
They could easily do that building if they chose to. It really, in my mind, it just says it's not a priority to them.
Yeah, $413 million. They could have paid for it if they wanted to. But
that's a less than a tenth of what they're asking.
Yeah.
So, there's stuff in that needs to be discussed. We like to refer to infrastructure as what's critical infrastructure, what's going to benefit the vast majority of Montanans, like better highways, better roads, sewer, water. These type of projects help the health and the economy of Montana across a wide spectrum of our citizens.
Let's go to Dave in Huntley, listening to KBUL. Dave, question or comment from you?
Yeah. One of the things that the governor didn't touch on was when he expanded Medicaid here in the state, he also cut the benefits. There are no dental benefits that have been returned since he cut them. And I'm wondering what's going on with that. Is he going to come back with that and change it back to the way it was? Or now that it's cut, it's bye-bye?
Good.
So that's my question. I'd even put that to Scott.
Yeah, that's a good question there, because you're right. You're right. Here was Governor Steve Bullock, who endorsed Medicaid expansion, who signed off on it, expanded benefits even to able-bodied adults who could work but don't work, but yet took away some of the benefits to the truly needy across Montana. Senator Sales, your thoughts on that?
Well, there's only so much money in Helena. It's the private sector taxes that pay for what we do up here. And when you have new programs that are started, whether it be the governor's initiative for pre-K funding or whether it be this Medicaid expansion, we're talking tens of millions of dollars. And like I said, there's a lot of intense competition from existing programs for new programs. There's only so much money that can go around. So it does put pressure on previous programs for the mentally ill. It puts pressure on programs for the elderly, without a doubt. So, one thing that the governor stated last night in his state of the state that I have to take exception with is that he called without that special session in 17, without contacting me or the Speaker of the House. That was his idea. That wasn't anything that the legislature did. Those cuts that were enacted were his cuts.
Yeah.
He came up with a list of cuts that said, hey, listen, if you don't give me this list of tax increases, these are the programs that we're going to cut. We didn't come up with any of those ideas. Those were his ideas that we put into law. So I thought it was a little disingenuous last night when he was trying to blame the legislature for the cuts, when those actually were a list of the cuts that he gave to us. And then once again, I want to say that in this logic-free zone of Helena, a cut oftentimes really isn't a cut. All it is a cut to the rate of growth.
Exactly.
So if you looked at that chart that I had behind me that showed the constant growth of government, which has been about 93% over the 16 years, that includes the 2 years forecasted that the governor has added with his budget. You don't see a cut in government. There's a couple different little dips, one around 2003. You had another one around 2009 during the Great Recession. And barring those two little tiny dips, it's been a straight line up of spending. So a government's live and well, and it's funded at a pretty high level. We haven't had a meaningful tax cut in this state since 2003. But there is only so much money, and when you come up with new initiatives, it's the older programs that oftentimes suffer.
Just about a minute and a half to go here with Senate President Scott Sales. The other thing that stood out to me from the coverage that I heard, read, etc., is the governor, Steve Bullock, was trying to take credit for the good economy. This is the same guy who felt he had to call a special session because of how much he destroyed the budget. But now the Trump bump brought in more revenues, which helped the situation. The Trump bump, the Trump tax cuts helped our economy. That's what got our economy going. Steve Bullock opposed those tax cuts, but yet now wants to take credit for the Trump economy?
Well, that's what politicians do oftentimes. But I agree with you, Aaron, that much of what we've seen here is because of the tax cuts at the federal level and decisions that the legislature's made also that have kept spending down, kept more money in the pockets of Montanans. We're under the belief that if we allow the citizens of Montana to keep more of their own money, they make better decisions with it than we will in Helena.